we'll start off talking about kind of what is Meraki, what are our solutions, what does our technology architecture look like, why should you care, which is obviously a big part of it, right? Why does this cloud-managed IT concept that we at Cisco Meraki talk about all the time actually matter, specifically for educational institutions, right, like Ascend. And then we'll talk more specifically about Ascend Charter Schools, the use case that Emeka and his organization have found for Meraki. We'll actually get into a demo where we'll look at the Ascend network. So we'll look at the live network. We'll look at what's going on with that infrastructure. We'll finish up by talking a little bit about the product families, some of the products that we'll be actually looking at today in the demo, as well as others that we offer under the Meraki product line within Cisco. And then hopefully we'll have some time at the end for Q&A. So I try to save a good 10 minutes at the end for Q&A so that if you have any questions, we can make sure we get those answered. Feel free to ask questions throughout the session. Tanya, also from our marketing team, is here to help me out and answer any questions that come up during the session. Those in the Q&A panel, not in the chat panel. It's just easier for us to keep track of. And if there are any left over at the end, or if you have questions for Emeka that maybe he can answer, those are the kind of things that we'll try to cover during the Q&A at the end. Or if there are any questions that Tanya thinks everyone should hear the answer to, then we may save those for the end of the session as well. So again, thanks for joining us, and let's get started. So if you're not super familiar with Cisco Meraki, hopefully you at least have some vague idea of who we are and what we do, given that you are here on this webinar. But let me give a quick refresher and kind of go a little bit deeper into what Cisco Meraki is all about and what it is that we offer. So first and foremost, we are a cloud-managed IT solutions vendor, right? We're part of Cisco, and within Cisco, we form what's called the Cloud Networking Group, and we offer wireless, switching, security, SD-WAN, IP telephony, mobility management, security cameras, all these different IT kind of components that are all managed through a centralized cloud dashboard. So there's two things to understand about that. One is all these products are managed from the cloud, right, from this cloud interface. Two is they're all managed from the same cloud interface. And that's what we call the full stack of Meraki solutions, where you actually have multiple Meraki products and you're managing them all in the same place, even if it's, say, a wireless access point and a security camera, or things that are traditionally not managed in the same place or in the same interface. So how does this work? Well, the way that this works is basically we have all these different devices, right? Wireless access points and switches being the two that we're going to talk about primarily today. And those devices are talking back to the Meraki cloud. And they're doing this over an encrypted tunnel that is created automatically when the device comes online. And it's important to understand that this tunnel is only used for management and monitoring. So we're bringing down firmware changes or security updates, configuration changes that you've made, and we're sending up monitoring metadata about what kind of traffic we're seeing on the network, who's on the network, how much bandwidth are they using, things like that, so we can display it to you in the interface. What we're not doing is sending, say, someone's traffic flow to Google through our cloud, right? The actual user traffic does not go through the cloud, which is very important from a security and compliance and privacy perspective. We're also fully HIPAA compliant. In our back end, we do constant security audits. One of the cool things about Meraki is we actually deliver security and firmware updates automatically from the cloud. So from a security perspective, it helps you to keep your infrastructure up to date. The other thing to know here is what happens when your device stops talking to the cloud. So if you have a series of Meraki components in your network and you lose internet, or for some reason there's some kind of routing failure with your ISP or whatever it may be, you lose connectivity to the cloud. The devices are going to keep running, and they're going to keep doing the same things they were already doing because they have a local copy of their configuration. They're just going to keep running that local configuration, what we've considered to be last known good config. They're just going to keep using that, passing traffic, inspecting traffic, connecting users to services until they reconnect to the cloud, at which point any changes you've made to the config will propagate down to the devices and they'll update those, but they'll just keep running through that whole period. They'll also continue to store the monitoring data. So normally we send that monitoring data to the cloud and then it gets kind of wiped out of the buffer on the device because there's no reason to store all of it on the device once it's already in the cloud. But if we're disconnected from the cloud, we'll buffer it locally until we can reconnect, and then we'll backfill whatever time period we weren't connected, which means you don't have a big, ugly, empty space in any of the graphs. You still have all of that data, even if you lost cloud connectivity for a little while. If you want to know more about reliability, security, anything really about our cloud backend infrastructure, you can go to meraki.cisco.com/trust to learn more about that. So when we talk about Meraki in education specifically. There's values to the individual products, right? There are features and things that we can do with the individual products, but there's also this concept of what is Meraki's value to education. And so we have a whole variety of different products, but they're all managed in this full stack architecture. They're all managed from one place. Whether you have one Meraki product or all 6 product lines, they're all managed in Dashboard. And what that allows you to do is use this one holistic solution to deliver a bunch of different things that are important to an educational institution. Connectivity is obviously important now with more and more digital learning being a core part of the learning process. So whether you're using a one-to-one program with tablets or Chromebooks, or whether you just have a lot of digital resources that students are leveraging and that educators are leveraging, right, to deliver the proper education to those students, you want to make sure the connectivity is solid at the wired and wireless layers. You want to make sure everything's secure. So this is, no malware is making it onto the network. Nobody's compromising any of the data, right? No adventurous student is doing anything they shouldn't be doing that's going to compromise the security of the network. And then also, sort of related to that, the filtering component. They're not doing anything that's going to compromise the safety of the students or the, behavioral safety of the students, anything that's going to put other students or the organization at risk from a legal or policy or compliance standpoint. So you get into that traffic filtering element of, well, let's control what people should and should not be looking at, right, on the school network. And finally, just improving the student experience. And this can be from, delivery of digital content through our mobility management solution. It can be through using our APIs to provide kind of automated attendance solutions or other things that just streamline the educational experience for both the students and the educators. I've noted a few of the major kind of feature areas on the right that I think are really important for education kind of deployments with Meraki. We'll talk about the high-density Wi-Fi piece a little bit. We'll talk about the content filtering. But there's a whole variety of different things that we do on the feature level with these different products, and some of them are cross-product, that really help us to deliver that best-in-class solution for K-12 organizations. So what does that look like? Well, the 4 major points here are high-density wireless without, massive operational expense or operational cost to the IT team. So being able to say, okay, we want to deploy wireless, we want to know that it's high quality, that it's going to work regardless of how many students we have and connected to an access point, that it's going to work regardless of how many access points we have to cram into a campus. We want to make sure that consistent, reliable connectivity is always there. And that's really what we can offer by managing all of this through the cloud, having automatic RF capabilities, having high performance hardware, right, all these different pieces. On the security side, not just network security, right, with firewalling, intrusion prevention, malware prevention, but also physical security. So we also have a security camera. So being able to offer, that kind of safety and security story of, well, we have campus safety and we have network security, and it's all in one holistic solution. From an IT perspective, there's a lot of tools built into Dashboard that are really important for not only satellite campuses and remote management, but just easier operational management and monitoring of the IT infrastructure. So making it easier to troubleshoot problems, making it easier to identify problems proactively, making it easier to replace hardware if you need to, right? All these things that are everyday operational things that IT has to do, just making them easier, taking some of the effort and the expense and the resources and the time out of that, and just making it easier for the IT team to do their jobs day to day, 1. And 2, by reducing the amount of time and effort and money that the IT team has to spend on day-to-day operations, freeing up that time and money and resources to focus on other projects that are going to add more value for students and teachers, right? Because that's one thing that every IT, I don't care if you're in education, in retail, in manufacturing, it doesn't matter. Every IT team in the world has a list of projects that they'd like to get to at some point, but keep being interrupted or postponed because of just day-to-day management issues and things, fires they're having to put out, right? So kind of freeing up that time to help you refocus those IT resources where they're going to have the most value. And then finally, and this is again something that exists across all of our products, a series of APIs to make it not only easier to deploy this at scale, but also making it easy to take data out of the dashboard and use it to do things like taking attendance, to do things like asset management for BYOD and making sure, or not BYOD, sorry, for one-to-one programs, making sure at the end of the year that everyone still has their one-to-one tablet, right? Things like that, that you can take some of the manual actions out of and not have to go through and scan every iPad one by one to make sure they're all there. You can just use an API call to check and make sure that all those devices are still checking in, that they've been in the school in the last week of the semester, right? Users are logging in, things like that, so that you can really just automate a lot of those processes. We've historically seen a ton of success in primary and secondary education. So it was one of the earliest markets that Meraki really shined in back when we were just a wireless company, was education. We saw a ton of K-12 schools adopting this technology. That trend has continued. It's extended into other products like switching security, our new security cameras, our mobility management, right? We've seen really, really good with education, which is great because it tells us that we're solving real problems, right? It tells us we're doing something right. And we want to make sure we continue to serve those education customers as well as possible, because they are really at the core of how we got our start, and a big chunk of our, of our business comes from that market. And we want to make sure that we continue to offer something really special for those educational institutions to help them do what they're trying to do more easily. So with that, with my spiel out of the way, let's talk a little bit about Ascend Charter Schools. So as I mentioned before, Emeka Ibekwe, the Managing Director of Technology at Ascend, was kind enough to join us today. And he and I are kind of just going to walk through some of the things that Ascend has done with Meraki. But first, we want to give a little bit of information about, what is Ascend? What is this organization we're going to be talking about? So Emeka, if you could just give us a quick kind of intro to, what is Ascend Charter Schools? What is your mission? What does the IT team look like?
Sure. Ascend Charter Schools we're a public charter school network located in Brooklyn, New York. We currently have 9 schools in 7 of our own buildings. This fall we'll be opening up this summer we'll be opening up our 10th school in our 8th building. We provide a liberal arts education and college prep to underserved neighborhoods within Brooklyn. Currently my IT staff is comprised of 5 members, myself included, and 4 other systems administrators, who essentially handle all of the day-to-day support, all of the projects, all of the security operations, and day-to-day end-user support. We do a lot of content. We do content filtering. We do pretty much just anything that most other school districts do. We're pretty much jack of all trades. We do networking, security, and a little bit of engineering. We actually even do a little bit of facility work. We do mount and install our own, access points. Some places have, facilities guys who do that. So that's a brief overview of our infrastructure and our team.
Great. So I want to talk a little bit about, what led you to Meraki. So can you give us a little bit of background on what the networking kind of infrastructure looked like before you made the shift to Cisco Meraki?
Sure. I started here in January of 2014. When I got here, we had, I think we had 4 schools at that time, each school having their own Cisco WLC 4400 series controller. Every school had about pretty much 2 access points per floor. The old 1162s, 1262s, 1130 access points. Pretty much the wireless coverage was pretty bad across the building, across each building. We had bonded T1s at our locations. There's no way to proactively know if an access point went down. So we actually had schools who had 2 or 3 access points down, and we didn't know because we weren't actively logging into the controller to figure out what was going on. We didn't know if we had loops on different areas. Our switches, we had old Cisco 2600 series, 3500, 100 meg switches. So our network infrastructure was pretty bad at that point. We started looking into, we were looking into upgrading our infrastructure with, pretty much more of the same, adding new controllers, adding, brand new WAPs, access points. But the cost on that was really, really expensive, and we don't have the budget outside of eBay to do major networking upgrades across, widespread across our schools. And we were growing. We were adding another 2 schools the following year. I remember that. That's what it looked like before. It was a pretty rough time for us.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like it. And I know a lot of schools kind of struggle with that upgrade path of, okay, where does the funding come from, not only for the hardware, but also we've got to take the time and the money to implement and to deploy and all that. So I know that's a common kind of challenge that I hear from a lot of schools that I talk to. So walk us through a little bit that, what led you to Meraki? Kind of how did you hear about Cisco Meraki, and what made you interested in checking it out? And then what that decision process was like of why Meraki appealed to you, right?
Sure. When I started looking into different wireless solutions, I actually looked into Aruba back then, and they had a controller-based system. And I saw that, so Meraki, and they had a similar type of product. And I think around that time, or maybe a few years before that, Meraki was purchased by Cisco. So I figured that, I'm a Cisco guy myself, so and I know Cisco in and out pretty well. So I decided to take a look at Meraki, and with the controller-less wireless systems, it made sense to me because I didn't want to have to manage, 5 or 6 other pieces of equipment individually at every site and have to go through and program and configure each controller one by one and have to do that across all my schools. And the dashboard was extremely appealing to me at that time because I could make, tons of changes right from my desk across all schools without having to physically either, telnet or SSH into another one of my schools, or actually have to, console into the controller to make changes. So that's what kind of led me to Meraki at that time.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about the Meraki deployment. So, how is this network laid out? Which products do you have, and kind of what's the architecture look like today?
Sure. So the products that we have at each of my schools, so now we have 7 buildings. Every school has one MS420. It's a 10 gig core switch. We have multiple 320s at every building. I think in total we have maybe about 40 320s around. Each individual switch and the core switch. So every access switch runs back to our core with a 10 gig uplink. We have a combination of MR34s and MR42s. I think we have 196 MR42s across the board. Every classroom has just about every classroom has a WAP installed. So we're a very highly dense population in terms of wireless. What else do we have? I think that's it for our Meraki infrastructure on the back end.
Okay. So you mentioned that you've got an AP in every classroom. So from a student experience and a teacher experience perspective, what is that? What are you using that for? And 2, how is Meraki helping you to sort of maintain and scale that infrastructure? What is it about the Meraki solutions that makes that easier for you than it would be potentially with other solutions?
Sure. So what we're using we recently started purchasing laptops for students. We're not a one-to-one school, but we are purchasing a ton of laptops at each school for online assessments. And without the infrastructure being in place right now, there's no way we would be able to do even a single assessment of students, even a classroom of 25 students with the infrastructure we had in place. So the Meraki solutions allowed us to be able to have multiple classrooms running, 20, 30 laptops at a single time, doing online assessments, doing online courses, different things that the teachers on the curriculum side have them doing. It's much easier for us. We don't have a problem. We don't have a worry. I teach a class myself. Intro to Creative Web Development class, and my students are on the wireless with no problems. The big difference with Meraki and what we had before is that the setup is much easier. We can just take a WAP, scan it from the box, plug it in, and then set it up on the back. And by the time we get to our desk, the WAP has downloaded the latest firmware. We can just do any IP config changes, reboot the WAP. We can see its connectivity, its speed. We can see the number of clients connected. We can see the data that's going through it. The analytics probably are the best I've ever seen in going through different vendors in terms of looking for wireless solutions.
So what about on the more IT-focused side with troubleshooting or determining issues? Because I know if you've got a team of 5 and you've got 7 buildings, 9 schools across, I think it's 9 schools across 7 buildings.
Yeah.
That's obviously got to make it kind of tough to troubleshoot. So what are you seeing there? Is Meraki helping you kind of with that side of things?
Absolutely. We're proactively notified in case of any issue. If a port speed is changed from a gig to 100 meg, we're notified. We receive an email. If a port is down for a certain amount of time, depending on how we configure it, we're notified. If a WAP goes from a gateway to a repeater, we're also automatically notified. These are things that we never had before. So WAPs could be down for days and weeks without the storm, but now we're notified, right when there's an issue. And if there's an issue with an individual WAP, we can log into it directly and figure out what's going on and get alerts through the dashboard or via email. So that helps. That simplifies troubleshooting a ton. We can either call into support and figure out what's going on with the WAP, or to simply replace it and put it back in the closet and figure out what's going on from then and there with minimal downtime.
Great. So, we've talked a lot about kind of what you're doing now. Let's talk a little bit about what's next. So what are some of the next steps that you see for your IT architecture, both more generally, like things that you're looking to do from a project perspective, and specifically, what future do you see for Meraki solutions in your infrastructure?
Sure. So another big focus of ours right now is security. So we want to replace our legacy Cisco 5500 series ASAs, our firewalls, with the MX400s. I've demoed it a couple of months back. And what we're looking to do is build additional SSIDs and also additional VLANs to segregate that traffic, segregate a guest network, a true guest network, and a separate SSID for our staff to bring in their own personal devices. Because we have content filtering that requires SSL scanner, we turn off SSL decryption and inspection on those two SSIDs. That way, folks can come in. And you also use you start using SD-WAN, because we do have MPLS across all of our buildings. We're looking to drop the MPLS from our ISPs and use the SD-WAN and auto VPN feature through the MX400s. Hopefully this summer. Hopefully we'll be able to do that this summer. That's a big part of phase 2. We're also looking into port scheduling, so that over the weekends we can shut down certain ports that are connected to our phones. Our phones are PoE, so we can get some cost savings in terms of electricity. We do have a large number of phones across our schools. Also, even shutting down some APs and give them a break, so they can relax over the weekend and not use so much power. If you don't need them to be broadcasting when school's not in session or when the buildings are completely locked down. That's a big part of our phase 2.
Great, thanks for that. So I want to take a look at what this actually looks like in practice. So Emeka has been kind enough to let us demo the Ascend dashboard. And one thing that I want to point out right off the bat, so this is the dashboard for anyone who's not familiar with it. If it looks a little bit different than you're used to, we actually moved to a new kind of layout and color scheme recently just to make it easier to navigate. So if it's like, oh, I've seen this before, this looks different, that's probably why, just to give you a heads up. But one thing that's kind of unique about the Ascend network that I thought was really interesting and I wanted to share is across these different locations, normally most of our customers do what's called one network, which is just a container and dashboard that you can put a bunch of different devices in to manage them together for each site. So they'll split out each campus or each school or each satellite into a different site and into a different network. What Emeka and his team have done, which I think is actually quite cool, they've got it all in one dashboard network, which allows them to do things like this. So if you look at, this is what's called the network topology. And what it's showing you is actually these different core switches are in different campuses. So this is the topology of the entire Ascend architecture across all 7 buildings. And you can see there are 7 of these core switches here. Within each of those, you have a variety of access and distribution layer switches, the MS320s that Emeka was talking about. And then you have access points down here as well. So if you want to dig into these, you can say, okay, well, there's a couple APs here, right? And you can jump into any of these individual devices. So from this one page, Emeka and his team actually have visibility into the entire architecture across all 7 buildings and can dive into any device, AP, switch, whatever, and see what's going on, troubleshoot, right? So I think that, personally, I've never seen anyone leverage dashboarding quite this way, and I think it's really cool. So I wanted to highlight that. That being said, across all these different things, across the wireless and wired layer, you have the ability to go in and see, okay, what's happening on the network, right? How much bandwidth is being used? What are people doing with it from an application perspective? Is there a lot of Dropbox? Is there a lot of YouTube, right? If there's a lot of YouTube and Netflix at a school, it might be time to dig into why, right? And it may be that it's nothing, people are doing it on lunch, and that's great. You've got lots of bandwidth. It's fine. They can do that all they want. It may be that they're doing it during class, in which case it's a bit more of an issue. So if you look at the timeline, right, you can see when this was happening. You can see who are the biggest users of Netflix, how much bandwidth are they using. You can also go at this from a client perspective. So you can take a look at, let's find wireless client, if I can type properly. Wireless, Windows, and in the 10.103 IP space. So you can get very granular, again, if I can type properly, with kind of what you want to see here. You can pull up one of these devices, and you can say, okay, this is a device that is a Windows 10 machine. It's connected to the Ascend Wi-Fi SSID on this access point. Again, you can click on topology and go back to that map of what the network infrastructure looks like and see, which switch that AP then plugs into and how that gets them out to the network and out to the internet. You can see what their policies are. So do they have any layer 7 or traffic shaping rules? In this case, they're not allowed to access peer-to-peer services, right? And you can see, to some extent, what they're doing with the network. Now, we blur a lot of this in demo mode because it is private information. There may be, identifiable data like URLs or IPs here, but you can see some of the examples of, oh, well, here's the YouTube usage for this client. Here's how much of it. You can kind of see how much active time, how many flows associated with YouTube here. So it allows you to get a lot more visibility. And that's one of the things I think Emeka was talking about is, you know a lot more about what's happening in your network with Meraki than you do with a lot of other solutions, which is really, really powerful. So I want to give Emeka a chance to kind of guide me through, some of the things that he really thinks we could highlight of what Ascend is doing. So feel free to point me at any particular feature or function or thing that you get value out of in the dashboard, and I'll just kind of drive along with that.
Sure. Let's go to the wireless access points. All right, so the naming convention that my team and I came up with is the first 4 numbers of the access point are the actual physical building's address, its location. The second is the floor, and the third is the WAP, and then its room location. So we know exactly where every WAP is by looking at it. From this page, I can isolate WAPs from a certain school. If I wanted to type in, the building I'm at now, 0205, I know exactly how many WAPs I have in this building. I can see their connectivity, and this isolates them from all of the other WAPs. I don't have to have separate networks to go into for specific buildings. I can see everything in one place. It's essentially one pane of glass. Everything is here. The same thing with the switches. Can you go to the switch? I'll show you a couple of things that I do on my switches. Same thing with my switches. My switches are labeled pretty much the same way. If I wanted to go through, 0205, the building I'm at, I can see all the switches, the floor that they're on, their IP address. I have it, laid out in the way the information that I need. I can also add tags also to on my switches, so I know I can, search by and perform functions based on the tag that the switches have. I can click, if you click the core switch, any core switch, I can if the port is flapping, I can, cycle a port, I can reboot WAPs, I can do so much from this port. It's so powerful compared to what we had before. We had pretty much nothing before, and the visibility into the network is it's actually being in the building. It's almost better than being in the building because I can do so much from here than I can do on the site physically. So I get all the information I need. I can see which WAPs have been used the most, have the most usage. We did run into an issue where we did run into some traffic on our WAPs. I was able to adjust some of the settings on our WAP to change the megahertz, the speed and on the WAPs without having to touch every single WAP. With Cisco, with legacy Cisco, I probably would have had to log into all of my controllers and adjust the settings for every WAP at that point. Here I did it in a matter of minutes. I was able to change some of my radio settings with no problem. I can do bandwidth traffic shaping from here. I don't need a separate application or a separate appliance. There's so much I can do within the device itself. Within each switch, without having to worry about going on site and consoling in. That just saves so much time and effort.
Yeah, so one thing I want to highlight. Sorry, one thing I want to highlight really quickly. There's this concept in Meraki called the virtual stack, which I think is really important and is actually something that matters a lot in environments like this one where you have a bunch of different switches in the same network. What we do is we actually treat all the switch ports as if they were on one physical switch. So that's why we call it virtual stacking. The switches can be physically stacked as well, but when you look at, you have a bunch of different access switches in a campus that may or may not be in the same closet, right? They may be separate from each other physically, but you can still manage them like one switch as if they were stacked. So if I want to grab port 6 of every switch, my browser's behaving. Let's try that again. Port 6 of every switch, there you go. Here on all 40 of those switches, here's port 6 of every switch. And I can select all of those at once, or I can even do, every switch that's tagged, or every port that's tagged as an uplink. And it's going to pull up the 14 that I've tagged specifically as uplink, right? There may be other uplink ports, but I may not have tagged them that way. So there's a variety of different ways that you can kind of search through this and find the different ports that you want to monitor or want to modify, and then you can just select them, right? You can select the whole group of ports across switches even, and you can make a change to all of them. So you can change up to 200 ports at a time across up to 200 switches at a time, which is incredibly, incredibly, if you want to change your voice VLAN across a whole topology or something like that. Sorry, go back to you, Emeka. I didn't point that out.
Oh, no problem. A big part of the project was actually cabling, which is something that my team, we are not skilled in cabling, so I do want to give a big shout out to custom computer specialists who came in and we started this project probably at the end of August last year, and they worked around our schedules, between, after school, between 4 and 7, in some schools 4 and 10, cabling every single classroom and every single office space so we can actually do this project. So that was a huge lift, a huge time saving for us because they were able to do that outside of the summer. So I want to thank them for that. I also want to give a huge shout out to my team who undertook this task in about 4 months to install all of these access points, things that we've never done before. And I don't think they understand the enormity of the project that we did. We had pretty much nothing and then pretty much changed the whole infrastructure within 3 months. We had a brand new infrastructure and are reaping the benefits of it now. So I think that's a big deal for us. That's a big thing that we were able to accomplish.
Is there anything else here in Dashboard that you really want to highlight for everyone?
We went through the topology. I think that's it. We covered the biggest things that I wanted to show.
Okay. Well, let me touch on a couple then that I like to show off. One of them, and Emeka did mention this, is the RF spectrum data. So one thing that we can do with the Meraki APIs, because they're all talking to this cloud controller, is we can report back RF information, right? So we can show you what the utilization is, and you can actually dive into an access point, and you can see right at this moment, what does the RF spectrum look like? And over the last 3 minutes, you can see a time-lapse heat map that shows you, right, blue, these kind of cooler colors mean, oh, there's not too much interference. It's a little bit of green and maybe yellow there saying there's a little bit of interference there. If it goes to hot red or even more consistent yellow, you've got significant interference. So it helps you to identify where are there RF problems and potentially troubleshoot them. Because if you unplug some appliance or something and you see this go from red to blue, that was a major source of interference. So it helps you to kind of keep an eye on that. You can also see what other APs are nearby, what SIDs they're broadcasting, how much interference they're generating, and you can do this on 2.4 or 5. You can also look at this from a troubleshooting view. And this is a fairly new capability, actually, that we just added very recently and required no updates, no maintenance. It was just you woke up one day and you just had this. I think it's really powerful. So if I go to this RF tab on this access point, it's actually going to show me kind of the last day or 2 hour, week, month, or even live data view for the either 2.4 or 5 gigahertz band of what was happening from an RF perspective. Were there any RF events? So we see here we changed one of the channels, right, due to an auto RF event, and we see the number of clients, channel utilization, the usage, and we can correlate all this data together to get a better sense of, oh, people started reporting problems at this time. Did anything happen then that we should know about that might have affected that? How can we figure out what caused the behavior we're seeing? So putting all this data in one place makes it much easier to determine that. And you can also see things like, oh, are we getting DNS and DHCP responses, or is something being dropped by the switch? So again, being able to troubleshoot really, really easily, I think is super important there. So we're going to actually dive back into slides for just a moment here, and then we'll wrap up with some Q&A. So let me jump back in here. So I want to highlight the product families within the Meraki kind of ecosystem. We've talked about a couple today, but there are actually 6 product lines in total. MR access points and MS switches we've looked at in the demo. MX security appliances, Emeka mentioned as a potential area for growth of Ascend's Meraki installation. Those are kind of the edge firewall, intrusion prevention, malware, content filtering, SD-WAN, all those WAN and security capabilities. It's important to note that on the wireless side, we actually have a series of indoor access points like the MR34 and MR42 that Emeka is using at Ascend. We also have a whole variety of outdoor access points. We have wall plate units. We have a pretty broad range of different hardware models there. And on the switch side, same thing. We have layer 2 and layer 3 switching. We have aggregation fiber switching. We have multi-gigabit switching, all these different capabilities there as well. The 3 products we didn't touch on too much today are our Systems Manager EMM or MDM product, which allows you to manage iPads, Chromebooks, laptops, Android tablets, a variety of different endpoint devices, and can be very helpful in one-to-one or other, assisted learning situations where you're trying to manage asset inventory, you're trying to push learning content down to these devices, you're trying to control what people can do with the devices. Those kind of things can be very, very difficult, and we make them a lot easier with Systems Manager, and again, all managed in that same cloud dashboard. We also have the MC phone, which is an IP phone that's managed through the cloud dashboard and is just standard voice over IP. So you plug it in, it calls home to dashboard, it identifies itself, and then from there you can just start making calls once, assuming that you have service in place. And you can order SIP service through the Meraki dashboard with our SIP partners and actually provision numbers, tie it into the directory. You can do PA announcements through the phone system. There's all kinds of cool stuff you can do with this. And most recently, the newest product line that I'm actually very excited about is the MV security cameras, which we just released several months ago now, but less than a year ago. And the cameras are kind of the first of their type, which is that there's no MVR, there's no video storage unit required. All the video is actually stored on a solid state chip in the camera, and you can go into dashboard and stream that video to your browser to that footage. So we'll store all the footage locally on the camera, and you can go in and view that. You can do motion search. You can do all kinds of cool things. We actually just released today time-based and motion-based recording. Again, no firmware update required. This is a thing that we literally just released today. I woke up this morning and saw an email saying, hey, these things are available now. So we're going to continue to iterate and add cool new stuff to these cameras. But it's really, really powerful to just have to put in a camera and nothing else. You don't need any NVR. You don't need any video management software. Dashboard, camera, internet, power, that's it. We have 2 models of those today, indoor and an outdoor unit. The outdoor unit is just ruggedized, same camera, but ruggedized and with a heater built in. So if you're trying to operate it, at very, very low temperatures in an outdoor environment, we can keep the unit at operational temperature with that heating unit that's built in there. And we will, of course, be looking at adding more camera models in the future as well. So with that, I want to give you an idea of what might come next. First things first, you can try any Meraki product using our evaluation program. Go to meraki.cisco.com/eval. Again, if you want to try wireless, if you want to try cameras, if you want to try switches, whatever it is. If you want to keep up with what's going on with Meraki, meraki.cisco.com/blog is where we'll post new features, new products, just what's new with Meraki in general. Keep up with us. And finally, your best contact, your best resource for all things Cisco Meraki is, of course, your Meraki rep. So if you don't know who your rep is, you can actually look at your webinar reminder email, which should have info for who your rep is. And if you can't find that email or feel like doing it the other way, you can also go to meraki.cisco.com/contact, fill out a form to get you connected to the appropriate rep to help you out with any questions that you might have. So with that, I want to see what questions we have here on the line before we go ahead and wrap up. All right, so first things first, a lot of these questions are probably going to be directed at Emeka. That's generally what we see. So I'm going to go ahead and just read them out, and then Emeka, whichever ones I point to you, feel free to answer. The first one we have, sure enough, is not for me. You mentioned you were looking at getting into, or you were starting to get into laptops. What devices, what types of devices are you using for that? What types of devices are you giving to students? And is there any BYOD in your environment?
We really don't have any BYOD. Folks bring in their devices not to use for work, but just, for recreational use. We're using the laptops that we're using Dell Latitude 3380s. They're made for education, so they're made for, for student use. So those are the machines that we're using. And we were using the 3350s, which went, end of life. Now that we're using the 3380s. So that's the device that we're using for our students.
Great. Another question, with 1 app per classroom, are you disabling 2.4 gigahertz entirely?
I thought about that. I actually lowered the bandwidth on 2.4 recently, and I didn't get to mention that through the portal. But eventually, I will be disabling 2.4. I'm thinking about it for the beginning of the next school year to disable 2.4 because all of our devices are on 5.
I got a question here that looks like it's for me about storage capacity in the cameras. So the storage capacity is 128 gig SSD storage. What that actually translates to in terms of retention is 20 days of continuous retention if you're recording everything. What's cool about what we released today, which is the motion-based and schedule-based recording, is you can extend that pretty aggressively. So this is a really cool capability. By default, we record everything for 20 days, but with the new capability, you can actually go in, you can say, I want to only record at these times, or I only want to record if there's movement, and we'll keep the last 3 days, last 72 hours of everything, and then past that, we'll only record movement. So it allows you to get kind of more of an incident response approach. And if you have cameras or you're trialing cameras, you can actually go into dashboard, and it will give you, based on either your camera history or based on an average. If you just put in the cameras and there's no data for us to work with, an average of all Meraki cameras worldwide, it'll tell you what you can expect in terms of retention if you turn on those features, which is kind of cool. It predicts. Sarah wants to know if that also includes motion-based alerts. I don't believe so. I'd have to double check. That'd be a great thing to follow up with your sales rep on. Another question that I've got here is, how do you reduce the RF spectrum percent under, this is a great question. How did you get the RF spectrum percentage under 50 in New York, in Brooklyn? And I think that's a great question. I'd actually be curious to know that myself.
Well, it mostly depends on the placement of the WAPs. We try not to place them near windows, try to place them either towards the center of the classroom or towards the door that leads into the classroom. That's the way we're able to do that.
Great. Got a question here from Keith about NAC solutions. So do we recommend any particular, I don't know if this is for me or for Emeka, so I'll answer with my thoughts, and then Emeka, if you have any thoughts here. Do you recommend any particular NAC solution? Do you have Meraki APIs? Does ICE integrate with Meraki APIs? What about ClearPass, Bradford NAC? So I'll say that from the Meraki perspective, we do have ICE integration on the APs. You can tie it into Bradford NAC. You can tie it into ClearPass, although obviously we're not huge fans of Aruba since they are a competitor. But yes, all those kind of standard NAC capabilities are supported. A lot of that will also tie into the Systems Manager MDM or EMM solution. So you can be pretty flexible with how you want to deploy that. And our systems engineers on the sales side, a ton of experience with that and can give you very pointed guidance about how that might look in your deployment. So that's another great thing to talk to your rep about. Let's see here. What would be considered too dense a deployment? I would say it's almost impossible to answer that question because it really depends on the RF environment you have. It depends on the devices each user has. It depends on building materials. There's so many things in play there. Generally, the rule of thumb is about 50 clients per radio. The way that the Meraki APs work is they have 3 radios, but 2 of them are for serving clients, and the other one is a full-time RF and WIP scanning radio. So when we looked at that RF spectrum data in dashboard, the way that we gather that and not have to have something like a scanning AP dedicated is there's a dedicated radio in every AP that's just full-time scanning. So the other 2 radios give you, basically, as a rough estimate, about 100 clients per AP is kind of the maximum you want. But again, it may be lower, it may be higher. It all depends on your environment. Dimple says in his dashboard, or his or her, sorry, I'm not sure, you're only seeing RF spectrum data for a few wireless access points. That may be because you're using, it depends on how old your infrastructure is. So if you have older APs, that are not her access points. Thank you. So if you have older APs that don't have that third radio model, all the ones we produced for the last few years have that tri-radio hardware approach. But if you have, older MR16s, some of the older units didn't have that, so we may not have that data. So it just may be a factor of which access points you have. But all of the modern units, all the current units we sell, all come with that 3 AP structure. All right, so with that, wait, we've got one more question that just came in, it looks like. Oh, I think it came in the chat panel. There we go. Yes, so someone asked for clarification. Yeah, 50 users per radio is kind of the maximum recommendation, assuming, a perfect RF environment, which really nobody has. So it varies drastically. And that's kind of, my point is just it's really hard to make specific recommendations without literally being on site and doing a site survey and seeing what the environment looks like. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up and give you guys a few minutes of your day back. So thank you so much to everyone for joining us. A big thank you to Emeka for joining us today and sharing some of his experience with Ascend. So thank you so much for that. And I hope everyone has a great rest of your day and a great upcoming weekend.
Thank you.